Hey, it's Steve. Let me share an analogy about the difference between people who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs and people who are actually doing entrepreneurship. And I call this the trepidatious concert goer. So imagine you have been to a lot of concerts, musical events, and you know what they're like. And somebody who has never been to one before talks to you about your experience. And you describe, what it's actually like. And they ask you, well, what if it's really loud? Like, what if I go there and it's just super loud? And you think, okay, well, sometimes that happens. And so you say to the person, yeah, that could happen. And they see that as a reason not to go. And they think, well, I might damage my hearing, then I shouldn't go, right? And you say, well, okay, that is a valid concern. It's a real risk, yeah. But then you miss out on all the joy of the experience. Then you miss out on all the fun. You don't get to go to the actual concert. And the other person is so concerned about that risk, that fear, because they're worried it might happen. And your perspective on it is that, yes, it might happen. Maybe even it will happen. But for you, that's not a reason not to go. That's just part of the experience. It's something that you just simply accept. So when you think about framing risk, you could see risk as something to avoid, like this trepidatious concert goer does. You could see it as something to accept and tolerate, or you could simply see the risk as something to embrace. It's part of the experience. It's part of the excitement about it. You can develop yourself into a character who can embrace risk. And to do that, you basically just look at the risk and you say, yeah, that could happen. And you try to do your best to be okay with it. Like, okay, if it happens, it happens. If it's really loud, it's really loud. If it's really loud, okay, I'll take a break to give my hearing a rest. Maybe not go to these super loud concerts for a little while. And then maybe I'll get back in the game and try again. It's okay to have those kinds of experiences that, may step in the domain of the risks you'd like to avoid. It's the same thing with starting a new business. When I hear people tell me their reasons for not starting a business, I might lose all my money. I might fail. My family might suffer because of it. What if I go broke or bankrupt? What if I can't pay my mortgage or can't pay my rent? I think of this as much like the trepidatious concert goer complaining about the loudness of a concert. Because I think, yeah, all that could happen. Those are valid risks. Those kinds of things happened to me when I first started my computer games business back in 1994. First 5 years, I sank into debt. I went broke. I went bankrupt. I got kicked out of my apartment because I couldn't pay the rent. And I just went back to work the next day after each of those things and kept right on going. It's okay to fail. You can fail. And the failures that people are so worried about in business and the things that they feel like they have to avoid, if you talk to people who've done entrepreneurship for a while, for them, it's more likely to be part of their past, part of their history, part of what they actually did experience. The truth is that people do experience failures. Many, many people who start new businesses don't succeed the first time or the second or even the fifth or 10th time. A lot of people go through many different iterations to try to find a business that works for them, that they like. People can come up with plenty of excuses. Some of the big ones are, I might run out of money, or I can't take the risk, or what about my family? I have kids to feed. What about the damage to my reputation? Blah, blah, blah. You have the long list of excuses. And the truth is, all those things could really happen. And they have happened many times to many entrepreneurs who are actually doing it. And you know what happens? You cope. You just deal with it and you get right back in the game the next day. The game doesn't end just because you miss a bill, just because you go broke, just because you declare bankruptcy, just because you have to tell your family we're out of money. The game does not end. You just wake up the next day. It's like Groundhog Day. You just go back and do it again. You try something different. You just keep trying. And eventually, if you keep trying and don't give up, there's a good chance you will succeed. But part of what makes it so interesting is just changing your relationship to failure, is not seeing it as such a big deal, not putting it on this pedestal as something that you have to avoid, but rather framing it as something that can and possibly will happen. And if it happens, you'll learn from it, you'll learn to deal with it, you'll cope, and you'll grow stronger. Okay, it's not something you absolutely have to avoid at all costs. These risks can occur, and if you can reframe your relationship with risk, I think it's more likely that you can go and have more interesting experiences, including starting your own business if you'd like. It's not the end of the world if you fail. You can recover. So I just want you to also be aware, though, that when you complain in advance about all these things that you're worried about happening, you're often complaining to somebody who's already experienced it. Much like the trepidatious concert goer, complaining about the loudness of a concert to somebody who's already experienced the loudness and lived through it and says, yeah, that could happen. So it's hard to get that much sympathy or empathy from such people for the fears you have. They're more likely to look back on you and kind of chuckle inside and saying, yeah, I was like that too. I was scared of the loudness of the concerts. I was worried about going broke. And I went through it and I experienced it. And I just went right back into it the next day. It's not the end of the world. So consider that the risk you see as in front of you, and you think it's something you have to avoid, for somebody else, it's just part of their history. And that could be you too. Okay, it doesn't mean that you're a lesser person for having those failure experiences happen. It actually is something that helps you grow. So you don't have to frame this as something to avoid at all costs, all the downsides of being an entrepreneur. It's a huge growth experience. And again, the game doesn't end just because you went broke or went bankrupt or you have to tell your family we're out of money. Okay. Oftentimes your family can be a great source of support. Okay. They can actually help you, get back in the game. Especially if you have an entrepreneurially minded family that wants to see you succeed on that path.